much, and thank you for having me. I'm coming from Norway, so I'm going to speak on Norwegian reuse, but hopefully that will be relevant for everyone here who is not from Norway as well. The title of the presentation has been set up as Norwegian reuse upscaled. I'm trying to lower the expectations a little bit here with the size of the font, but I'll get to that later. When I speak about reuse, I speak about, I'm going to take this one, I guess. Thank you. We really speak about something that has been going on for a really long time. So what we're trying to do in some sense is to bring back a type of industry that has always been there, but which has kind of disappeared in Norway. When I talk about we, that's Resirqel. That's the main company where I'm employed and a partner. But we also have a little bit of a group of other companies that we use to try and back up our processes. Resirqel has started out as a kind of materials handling project for reused materials. In the beginning, it was started by Martin Eid, which is pictured here on your right. And it was about trying to take components out of buildings that were at the time being wasted. They were being put into the general waste stream and not used again. Sometimes perhaps it could be recycled, but they were not used as components. He was trying to find a way to reuse them outside of the country. After a little while, started up in 2013. 2015 was full-time. 2018, I think he was joined by my colleague Olav, and 3 years ago I joined. And we've been trying to find different solutions on how to solve this fairly wicked problem of taking out components in the modern building industry and on the highest level of customers, like large customers like Statsbygg and Entra, and to deliver enough quality materials for them to be able to use it in their projects. So in order to do that, the business changed a lot into consultancy. Because when you do component reuse, you need to have the same documentation basically as you need with new materials. And you have a little bit of a different process than what you do when you have new materials. So you really need to have a reuse consultant on the project because the business isn't really matured enough. The customers don't know enough about reuse that they can do it themselves. So you need to have someone who has been through the process before. But of course, we also kept on doing the materials handling. And we have stepped up also with the digital side of this. On the screen now is the kind of a definition of component reuse, because I know for a lot of people it can be a little bit confusing whether or not this is rehabilitation of old buildings where they are. It's not. Whether it's recycling, where you destroy the material and you rebuild something from it. It's not. But it does include moving entire buildings, like a storage hall, which is quite often done. Like I was mentioning earlier, reuse is not really a new thing. And for some people, especially people in farm communities and sometimes in other parts of the world as well, it's an obvious thing. Why would you throw away usable materials? They're costly. You might as well take them down and reuse them. In the situation in Norway in the good old days, structures were a lot simpler. Components were a lot more expensive, comparably, to the labor cost. There was no difficult standardization or bureaucratization that was in your way. But mostly I think it's the economical side that has really changed our building sector into a place where we create a lot of waste. In Norway now, which is a fairly small economy, 22,000 buildings, something like that, is destroyed every year. Very little of it is reused. We are demolishing a lot of functional buildings just because they're in the wrong place. We might have a small business case in tearing them down and building something else. Sometimes we even build things that are almost exactly the same size. So our question has always been, why do we do this, and how can we shift the economy a little bit? Commercial buildings are the ones that are generally being knocked down the first. So when you're talking about housing, a lot of the time they stay for a lot longer. So that's has not been our focus up until now. This is from a workshop a few years ago when I was working with the Norwegian steel industry. And that's where we started trying to create regulation changes that you can actually do this legally. And we found that a lot of our members was not didn't have really good experience with trying to do reuse. So as you see, if you do this legally, you will curse. All right. I'm going to get back to the regulations as well, but I have to move on a little bit quickly here, so I'm going to try and put this video on. Do you want to turn it down? All right, this is a little bit of a quiz, so everyone can join in and guess what's wrong with the video. You get it? Huh? Yes. The music is a hint. It's backwards. That's why the music is like that. So this is a regular construction hall in Oslo that was definitely not built to be reused. But it's mostly prefabricated, which Ada was talking about a little bit earlier here. And prefabrication has the best chance to be reused, basically. Or perhaps the easiest one, but also maybe the only one that's possible. So here's that hall in another location. Generally, you can save a lot in terms of economy, in terms of CO2, in terms of waste, and in terms of natural destruction. So the benefits of a circular economy, and especially a component reused economy, are exactly what we're looking for in today's economy. Then we have the regulations that have been standing in our way. I'm going to have to jump through this quite quickly, but I think you have similar regulations here. They might be, held to a little bit different, or they'll be working a little bit differently, but I think they're similar. DOC is basically the EU rules of CE marking and buying and selling materials that have been taken into the Norwegian law. The rules, when I came into the industry, were seen as forever and not possible to change. We made a little bit of a industry rebellion and wrote in the newspaper how we didn't accept the way that they were being enforced. And amazingly, we were listened to by the government. The former government minister, Astrup, Nikolai, invited us for a meeting. It was sent on a hearing, and he changed some regulations immediately and put larger changes on a hearing. And we just had a visit from the new government's minister a few weeks ago, actually changing the rules so that we can write documentation for reused materials ourselves. We don't have to do it according to the CE rules, which is based on production, which essentially makes it impossible. Resirqel is doing basically everything in the component reuse circle. We have grown to become more than just one company because it's such a complex issue to solve. So Resirqel has gone from being a logistics manager with a truck with a little crane on the back to becoming a consultant company. Ombygg has been recently established to do the logistics in the shop. And Materia is, I guess, the one that could have joined the earlier discussion because it's a small tech startup, which basically takes care of recreates documentation and take care of the documentation throughout the process. We try to get in quite early when we deal with reuse, because if you have started a project, either if you designed it too precisely, or if you already contracted the demolishing company, there's so much more hurdles to try and jump. If you have a demolition company already in your project, and if you have a building on site, and you try to make them disassemble the building in a way that you can actually keep the materials, it will be extremely costly, in my experience. If you put it into the contract when they're trying to get the job, it will basically be for free. So we try to get in quite early and be part of writing the process contracts and everything. It's a similar thing when you try to design a building. If you already designed, for instance, your cabin, and you've decided the sizes of everything, you cannot go into a component reuse market and try and find those sizes. You need to have a kind of a loose design, and then you can find almost anything you need, but you have to be a little bit flexible. I'm going to jump through these a little bit. Reuse mapping is really key to what we do. It's becoming quite standard in Norway among the larger building players. Statsbygg is doing it with all their buildings now. We also wrote standard with them and Norwegian BREEAM group about how to do it or how to order it. It basically means that you try to create a very, very simple list of all the components that can be reused in the building. And that's also what we use the digital tool for, because in that we can create a list that can be, you can sell parts of the materials before it's even knocked down. So the building becomes a material bank, which is purchasable. That makes it quite effective, but we found that because of the building industry being so unpredictable, you need a temporary storage as well. You also need a place that you can do testing and documentation outside of the building site, because there's certain ways to document on the building site. For instance, you can use XRFs, and you can figure out what kind of steel quality you have a little bit, what kind of chemical components you have a little bit, but it's limited. All right, so I'm going to jump through a few projects just to show you a little bit of the actual output of this kind of pilot world that we're running through at the moment in this upscaling period of our industry. This was the first project which we were actually the contractor. And it's very, very small, temporary, not following the rules of Tech 17, which was mentioned earlier in the first talk, but because it's just a pavilion basically. But it's all reused, and parts of it is also taken from the structure that is put on, because there's a lot of offcuts generally if you don't prefabricate your panels, which is the case here, and then you can use that in small projects like this. That was 3 years ago. 2 years ago, this one opened. It's become like the flagship of the Norwegian reuse industry. Christian August got 13, or just KA 13, designed by MAD Architects. I think I had a picture earlier actually where I showed our old warehouse, and there we go. I was trying to show these windows, but the windows were in our warehouse earlier, so they were coming out from a wrong design from a larger building project, and they were in our warehouse for about a year, and then they were put here. There's also a lot of other materials inside this project that has been either bought from Resirqel or has been going through our logistics system at some point or another. It's a really great project, but obviously it's a small pebble in the giant pile. Finally, we got this project, which we were helped to design also with mad architects, and which we're trying to create a much larger reuse case with also with living houses, which is different housing. And the problem here that this illustrates is that this was designed trying to imagine what materials could be available at the time of construction. So we pointed out to different types of Oslo buildings that were going to be demolished within the next few years, before the construction was supposed to start. The construction was already supposed to start a year ago, has been postponed, but interesting enough, none of the buildings that we pointed out to be used as raw materials for the process has been demolished either. So that's the building industry for you. You know, they have a lot of these components. If you were from Oslo, you would probably recognize a few of them, like Galleri Oslo. But it points to a really critical missing element in the whole logistic circle for reused materials. And it's, you need some sort of safety of delivery if you're going to have a $1 million project, €1 million. And that is some sort of circular resource center, somewhere where you can keep a large amount of materials. You can change them a little bit. Maybe you change the paint. Maybe you need to redocument them in some sense. But you also just need this safety of delivery. So we're trying to establish that, at least at this point in the industry. I think it's really crucial to make it happen. We were lucky enough to lose our warehouse. And when you lose a warehouse full of building materials and you only have 1 or 2 months to move out, you realize how important it is to have some sort of safety of time looking forward. So we started looking for a place that could be a little bit more permanent than what we had at the moment. And we talked to Statsbygg, and they wanted to find an interesting use for the tent that they had been using at government quarters in Oslo. So we found out that this is something that we can cooperate on, and we can create something that can function both for us, but also for Statsbygg's circular ambitions. The purpose is to facilitate increased reuse. So we're not going to only try to work locally, but we're going to physically work locally. We're going to learn as much as possible, and we're going to try and spread that knowledge out towards the rest of Norway and possibly Europe. The tent itself is 4,500 square meters, and the plot that we're currently renting, which is landing on in a very central location in Oslo, where there's a lot of, it's basically a transportation hub right outside our offices, is 7,000 square meters. So we just got the rammetillatelse, yeah, it's the basic permission. So we are not allowed to put the shovel in the ground, but we have gotten the permission to apply to put the shovel in the ground. It's Norway. It's going to be a place for trading. It's going to be a place with workshop and facilities. There's also going to be some amount of teaching going on there. It's going to be possible to go there and touch materials and see if you want them, if you like them, if you want to design with them. So hopefully you go into a digital solution first. You figure out if there's something interesting there for you. Then you can go in maybe as an architect, actually get a feel for the materials. And you can buy it on the spot, or you can pay a little bit so that we keep it for you until you know that you want it. The Knowledge Center is the national center, which is also has members from all over Norway. And hopefully we can contribute a little bit to the spread of this in Europe as well. It has been quite fun to be part of this upscaling because, as Rita was saying, like only 2 years ago, it felt a little bit sci-fi in Oslo. I would say that Holland was miles ahead of us. Denmark also a little bit. But I think at the moment, especially when we got our tent up here, we're gonna feel like we are at least catching up in some way. But the upscaling is not really finished, but I would say we're on the way. Thanks.
Thank you. I have questions, comments as well. So you're building then like a second-hand store, but in the construction industry, right?
That's right.
Is it also built from old materials? Or
yeah, the tent has been used before, as a construction tent.
Okay, great. So I wanted to ask about the regulations. Does this mean that in the future, all the new buildings, they have to be reused or planned to reuse the materials or even the essence of the building? This is the case, or?
It's definitely the case, but it's not the regulation yet. But if we're going to reach anything close to the Paris ambitions, that we have to keep the materials that we have. And there was a movement now where the larger players and also the regulations is kind of catching up a little bit. So I have no doubt that in a few years it will be necessary to do a mapping of your building, and a few more years there will be a certain percentage that you have to reuse, I think.
Okay. Well, thank you.